On February 9, 1944, off the southern coast of France, with 1,400 hours of flight experience, a young 22-year-old Air Force pilot, Sergeant Bob Hoover, was behind the stick of his Supermarine Spitfire tail number NA-883, call sign Black 3. Oh, and if the name Bob Hoover sounds familiar, that's because it should. Because he would eventually go on to become one of, if not the greatest pilots and test pilots the world has ever seen. But this video isn't about the entire remarkable career of Bob Hoover, but about the one seminal moment in time that set Bob Hoover on the path to becoming one of the biggest legends of aviation the world has ever known. However, on this day, history was gonna have to wait to see how the events of 9 February 1944 would unfold first, before the history books could be written. Hoover was flying a mission codenamed Clatter Black, covering an area off the French coast between Cannes, France, and Genoa, Italy. Also along on the mission with him was Black 1, flown by Officer James H. Montgomery Jr., Black 2 by 2nd Lieutenant Henry E. Montgomery, and Black 4 by 1st Lieutenant Bradley Smith. Shortly before 2 p.m., the Clatter Black 4 were patrolling at 10,000 feet when 35 minutes into the patrol, they spotted a small German naval convoy off the coast of Nice. One by one, each of the 4 battle-hardened, experienced Spitfire pilots dove onto the ships below, strafing the decks and dropping their bombs as they flew by. After the last pass made by Black 4 made a direct hit on one, as the men began to get the hell out of there, climbing to a safer altitude through a hailstorm of 20mm gunfire from the Germans below. Just as Bob Hoover was congratulating Lieutenant Smith on his direct hit, the radio crackled alive with a warning to the Clatter Black crew. A 4-plane German formation was headed right for the Americans, inbound hot at 9 o'clock. Oh, but these just weren't any German fighters. They were the flying Focke-Wulf FW-190s, widely believed to be the best fighter aircraft in all of World War II. Many considered it an equal to America's P-51 Mustang. The 4 light blue and white camouflage Focke-Wulf 190 Werger fighters were lined up wingtip to wingtip at 5,000 feet and had the American Spitfires in their sights as they swooped in on their prey. Black 1 Montgomery shouted over the radio, "Watch it, they're 190s." As the 4 German 190s broke their formation, instantly adrenaline started coursing through Hoover's veins. Hoover thought to himself, finally a real dogfight, not practice. Suddenly a pair of FW-190s swung in behind Black 1, and Hoover radioed to him to brake left, but it was too late. That's when all hell broke loose as a firestorm of flak from the ground and tracer rounds from the 190s behind finished off Black 1 and Flight Officer James H. Montgomery Jr., as all Hoover could do is watch his friend's Spitfire burst into flames as it spun down toward the sea below. Recognizing the need for maximum performance, Hoover pulled the tank release to get rid of the external fuel tank, but the handle came off in his hand. With the maneuverability and speed of his Spitfire limited, the odds were stacked against Hoover, as the Fokker 190s capable of speeds of 300 miles per hour or more could outperform the Spitfire's 215 miles per hour. It was like racing a Model T Ford with a Cadillac, Hoover recalled. With the Spitfire's superior turning ability now his only defense, he headed straight for a German fighter, pulling the trigger of his 50 caliber cannons the whole time, raining fire on the German plane. But working as a team with their superior airplanes, advanced Luftwaffe dogfighting skills, and more experience, the German 190s came after Hoover's Spitfire. However, unfortunately for Hoover now, it was 1 against 4, because both of Hoover's wingmen, Black 2 and 4, were unable to help, having exhausted their aircraft's ammunition in the early minutes of the battle. As his fuel-laden aircraft was slower than they anticipated, it caused the German fighters to overshoot him. A lucky break for Hoover, but just as he had a German 190 in his sights, his own airplane got hit from below, sending shrapnel throughout his cockpit, injuring Hoover's legs. Well, they got old Hoover, Hoover's wingman radioed to his other teammates. "I'll try and stay a little longer," he said. "Maybe I can get one of those bastards." But with his engine now fried, Hoover pushed the canopy open, then inverted the plane and bailed out, high enough that both of his wingmen could see his parachute near the water. But as if things weren't bad enough for Hoover and the team, the section leader, Black 4, also saw something else. A pair of German speedboats headed directly for Hoover in the water below. Squadron mates, led by Major William M. Houston, searched for Hoover in Montgomery, enduring an attack from another wave of German FW-190 fighters. In that skirmish, Lieutenant John L. Bishop was shot down 6 miles southeast of Cannes, France. None of the downed airmen were located and failed to locate each other. After hitting the cold waters of the Mediterranean Sea 20 miles from France, Hoover inflated his Mae West life vest, untangled his parachute lines, and waited for rescue. As his mangled leg wounds burned and throbbed in the salty water, from below Hoover watched his squadron search for him, even the ensuing dogfight that claimed Lieutenant Bishop's airplane. As he floated there, writhing in pain, his attention was on his friend Montgomery, wondering and hoping he managed to survive. But he also was wondering who would find him first, the Americans or the Nazis. 4 hours after he bailed out, as the sun was setting on the horizon, Hoover soon received his answer: the Germans. Hoover was now a prisoner of war. After arriving on shore in France, Hoover was marched through the town of Nice and placed on display for Germans to mock and harass. He was interrogated but gave only his name, rank, and service number: Robert A. Hoover, Flight Officer 2044029. I also imagine old Hoover was also giving them the old "You're number one" American salute as he did it. After that, he was taken to Marseille and was thrown into a local jail. However, Hoover had no intention of staying there very long. It was obvious to Hoover that the jail was poorly maintained and barely a jail at all. So of course he loosened the bars of his cell's window and escaped, injured legs and all.
Stinking Nazis.
Well, freedom for Hoover didn't last long, thanks to an attack by German guard dogs. The noise of the dog attack alerted the guards, and Hoover was quickly recaptured. Well, for a little while at least, because Hoover would try to escape 3 more times. Well, after his game of fetch with the German shepherds, Hoover was taken to an interrogation camp in Oberursel near Frankfurt, where Hoover was further interrogated, isolated in a train boxcar, and constantly threatened with execution. Yet Hoover, being the general badass that he is, didn't want to visit with the Germans anymore.
All American officers so ill-mannered.
About 99%.
So on his 3rd escape attempt, Hoover used a turtleneck to hide his uniform. He nearly walked right out of the camp's front gates, that is, until he encountered a guard who attempted to converse with the disguised Hoover.
I know nothing. Nothing.
Well, thwarted once again, the Germans have had enough of this pesky American, so Hoover was finally shipped off to the permanent camp for airmen, Stammlager Luft prison camp outside Barth, Germany near the Baltic Sea, better known as Stalag Luft 1. Originally constructed to hold captured British airmen, Stalag Luft 1 soon became the primary camp for downed American airmen due to their extensive daytime bombing missions over Germany. The camp featured double 10-foot-tall barbed wire fences with a dangerous warning wire inside. I'm not sure what that is exactly, but I'm guessing some kind of electric fence patrolled by German guards, known as goons, who were authorized to shoot any POW attempting to cross the perimeter.
To cross a wire is death!
What wire?
This wire! The warning wire!
During Hoover's 16-month stay as a POW, or a Kriegi as the Germans called them, he kept trying to escape, and they kept catching him. So he ended up spending many weeks in solitary confinement every time upon recapture. While there, however, he also met many lifelong friends. Among them was American test pilot Major Gustav Edward Gus Lindquist. As luck would have it, as a test pilot, Lindquist had flown many captured German aircraft, including the FW-190s in England, where he was able to learn their strengths and more especially their vulnerabilities. Wanting to join the war and gain combat experience, he was shot down by Messerschmitt Bf 109 on his third mission, flying a Mustang P-51D. During their many conversations, Hoover expressed to Lundquist his desire to fly again someday, especially his lifelong dream to escape a POW camp in, quote, a liberated enemy fighter. So Lundquist shared his knowledge and experience of German aircraft with Hoover. Hoover said from memory he'd brief us on the cockpit checklist, scratching out pictures in the sand and the prison compound. And in yet another psychic foreshadowing, Hoover also made clear to Lundquist his plan after the war, that he wanted to fly at Wright Field, the then home of the Army Air Force's flight test program. Acting as the commander of the captured Allied airmen was Colonel Henry Russell Russ Spicer. At one point, Spicer needed to get his POWs in line, chastising them, saying, "I've noticed that many of you men are becoming too buddy-buddy with the Germans. Remember that we are still at war with the Germans. They are still our enemies and are doing everything they can to win this war. So don't let them fool you around this camp, because they are dirty, lying, and sneaky and can't be trusted." However, as a result of those remarks, the German camp commandant charged Spicer with defaming German character and inciting prisoners to riot. He was court-martialed in a kangaroo court and sentenced to 6 months solitary confinement, after which he was scheduled to be executed. However, after one of Hoover's stays in solitary for yet another failed escape attempt, he spoke with Spicer through the cell walls. The colonel encouraged the young pilot, saying, "Don't give up. I'm proud of you. You keep on giving these people hell. I want to see more of you, so keep making it difficult for them to contain you." Then late in 1944, after the Allied invasion of Normandy and victory was in sight, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower issued orders to the POWs to stop their escape efforts, as they would be liberated soon. But Hoover and the other 200-plus members of the camp's escape committee didn't care. With the unpredictable Russian Red Army advancing from the east and the German guards possibly executing all of the POWs to cover up any violations of international laws at the camp, in April of 1945, Hoover and 2 others organized and executed their escape plan. Hoover said, "We found a board underneath one of the buildings. A bunch of people who had worked on the escape committee created a diversion. They started a fight on one side of the compound, so the guards were all looking over there. Then we ran out with this plank, put it up over the top of the fence, and climbed out." With Hoover was 2nd Lieutenant Jerome Jerry Ennis, also from the 4th Fighter Squadron. Also with the pair was a Canadian airman named George, but shortly after the escape, George decided to go it alone. Ennis and Hoover found shelter in a farmhouse under hay in the barn. The next morning, they were discovered there by a French woman who had been forcibly moved to Germany. Helping the escapees, Hoover wrote a note thanking her and asking any allies who encountered her not to harm her. She read and understood the importance of the note and gave the pair a small handgun. She said it would do us a lot more good than it did her. Later that morning, Hoover and Ennis stole a pair of bicycles from a nearby village and continued west. Soon the pair came upon a German airfield that was poorly staffed, but held more than 24 aircraft, including FW-190s. They first checked aircraft on the outskirts of the airfield and found a ravine that stored a bullet-riddled FW-190 with only slight damage and tanks full of fuel. With the help of Ennis and the .25 caliber pistol given to him earlier, Hoover was able to commandeer a German FW-190, the same Superior plane that shot down his Spitfire, while Ennis held a German ground crew member at gunpoint, instructing the mechanic by speaking French, which the man understood. Jerry told him that if he didn't help me get airborne, he'd kill him, Hoover said. "I got in the cockpit and the German helped me get the engine going. The fuel gauge was full and the engine ran up nicely." But when Hoover waved to Ennis to climb aboard, he declined. Ennis told Hoover that he never wanted to fly again. Realizing that the Germans could shoot at him as he took off, Hoover quickly closed the canopy, opened the throttle to full power, and took off across the grass field to the runway. As soon as I got airborne and pulled the gear up, Hoover said, that's when the stupidity of what I was doing hit me. I thought, here I am in a German airplane without a parachute. Also, since I was flying a plane with a swastika painted on the side, I feared the Allies might shoot me down too. It was overcast at about 4,000 feet. Hoover said he pulled up to the bottom of the overcast so he wouldn't be a target. Then Hoover headed north until he saw the North Sea. I didn't have any maps or charts, he said. I knew that if I turned west and followed the shoreline, I would be safe when I saw windmills, because the Dutch hated the Germans. He followed the coastline to the liberated Zuiderzee, a shallow bay of the North Sea in the northwest of the Netherlands. When he saw a windmill, he looked for somewhere to get fuel. I had passed over some airfields that appeared to be deserted, but I knew that deserted runways were often mined, he said. He chose an open field behind the Allied lines for his landing site. He intentionally ground looped a fighter to avoid a ditch, wiping out the landing gear in the process. Upon exiting the crippled plane, locals gathered around him thinking he might be a German defector. Seeing a British Army truck, Hoover waved it down and told the driver, I'm an American, but they think I'm a German. The driver told Hoover, get in here with us. And he was returned to U.S. troops, and Bob Hoover was finally a free man again. Although he didn't know whether or not his fellow escapee Jerry Ennis had succeeded as well. While his flight to freedom was written about in his hometown newspaper after the war in November of 1945, few knew of Hoover's FW-190 escape. That was until in the mid-1980s, his fellow escapee Jerry Ennis appeared at an air show Hoover was performing at in Reading, Pennsylvania, and they shared the whole story with other air show attendees. Hoover told the crowd, I wasn't proud of that flight. It was about the dumbest thing I've ever done. The German garrison left the camp on April 29 before the arrival of Soviet forces on May 2, 1945, who liberated the camp and released the prisoners, including Colonel Spicer, whose scheduled execution date of April 1, 1945 was overlooked by camp officials because they had bigger problems on their hands. And one final note about Bob Hoover's amazing escape. Remember back in the POW camp when Hoover said one day he wanted to be a test pilot at Wright Field? Well, after the war, he was assigned to test flight duty at Wilbur Wright Field near Dayton, Ohio. There, he impressed and befriended some other pilot. Oh, what was his name? Oh yeah, Chuck Yeager. Later, when Yeager was asked who he wanted for the flight crew for the supersonic Bell X-1 flight, the first flight to break the sound barrier, he named Hoover. Hoover became Yeager's backup pilot in the XB-1 program and flew chase for Yeager in the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star during the Mach 1 flight. He also flew chase for the 50th anniversary of the Mach 1 flight in the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. Bob Hoover died on October 25, 2016 near his home in Los Angeles at the ripe old age of 94. So how about that? Bob Hoover, a real man's man and a legend's legend. Now I know many of you know all about Bob Hoover because he is truly a legend and a hero in the history of aviation. But maybe this video found some of you who never heard of Bob Hoover or never heard the details of this amazing story. But if we were to stay here and discuss the life story of Bob Hoover, it would literally take days. So if you know the story already, thanks for watching. And if you're new to this story and Bob Hoover, I encourage you to start Googling and YouTubing Bob Hoover, because that's a rabbit hole that will take you on a journey that will last you many hours, if not days, and you'll be glad you did. Well, that's going to wrap it up for now. As always, if you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing, and on your way out, also remember to like, share, and ring the bell. But most of all, remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.